The sirens were still wailing when I signed the papers. My hands shook so badly that the lawyer had to steady the pen for me. And somewhere behind me, Nancy was screaming that I'd ruined everything, that I was selfish, ungrateful, that I'd pay for this. The fluorescent lights in that law office felt like they were burning holes through my skull. And I remember thinking how strange it was that the end of your family could happen in a room that smelled like stale coffee and old carpet. But that's getting ahead of myself. To understand how I ended up there, with my own blood relatives looking at me like I was their worst enemy, I need to take you back. 3 months earlier, I was still under the illusion that family meant something. 3 months before that moment in the lawyer's office, I was sitting in my living room in Phoenix, watching the evening news and feeling pretty good about life. At 62, I'd built something I was proud of. The house was paid off, my retirement was secure, and I'd managed to stay close with my siblings and my daughter through all the ups and downs life had thrown at us. Nancy lived 2 blocks away with her husband. Tom was across town with his 3rd wife, and Julie had just moved back from California with my 2 grandkids. We had Sunday dinners. We had holidays together. We had what I thought was love. When my Uncle Gerald passed away that Tuesday in September, I felt sad, sure, but I didn't expect what came next. Gerald had been the family eccentric, the one who'd made a fortune in real estate back in the 80s and then basically disappeared into his mansion in Scottsdale. I remember him from childhood, always in expensive suits, always distracted, like his mind was calculating numbers even during family gatherings. He'd bring elaborate gifts at Christmas, things that felt impersonal but expensive, like he'd had an assistant pick them out, a cashmere scarf, a crystal vase, things that said, "I spent money," but not, "I know you." We saw him maybe once a year at Christmas, and even then, he mostly kept to himself, nursing a scotch in the corner while the rest of us exchanged presents and argued about politics. I'd made a point to visit him a few times over the years, mostly out of obligation and the nagging voice of my mother in my head saying that family was family no matter how distant. Those visits were awkward. Long silences punctuated by his questions about my life that felt more like formalities than genuine interest. But I kept showing up. That was who I was, the one who showed up. So when his lawyer called and asked me to come to his office, I figured it was just some small keepsake, maybe a photo album, or one of those old family Bibles people leave behind. I went alone, didn't even mention it to anyone. That was my first mistake. The lawyer's office was in one of those glass towers in downtown Phoenix, the kind where the air conditioning is always too cold and everything smells like new carpet and ambition. I sat in the waiting room for 20 minutes, watching well-dressed people hurry past with briefcases and important expressions. When they finally called me back, I followed a paralegal down a hallway lined with diplomas and framed photos of buildings I assumed the firm had helped finance or litigate. The inheritance was $34 million. I remember the exact moment the lawyer said the number because the air conditioning in his office chose that exact second to kick on, and the sudden blast of cold air made me shiver. Or maybe that was just shock. 34 million. The number didn't even sound real. It sounded like something from a movie, from someone else's life. Not mine. Never mine. I sat there in that leather chair, staring at a man I'd never met before. Late 50s, silver hair, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and he was telling me that my weird uncle had left me everything. Not Nancy, not Tom, not split 3 ways, just me. The oldest niece, the one who'd apparently visited him most consistently over the years, even if those visits were only annual and awkward as hell. He explained that Uncle Gerald had been very specific in his will. He'd appreciated that I never asked him for money, never tried to get close just because he was rich. He'd noticed that I visited him even when it was clearly uncomfortable for me, even when I had nothing to gain. He'd watched the rest of the family keep their distance until they needed something, and he'd made his decision accordingly. The irony burned like acid in my throat. I'd never asked because I never knew exactly how much he had. and I'd visited because Mom had always told me that family meant showing up, even when it was inconvenient, especially when it was inconvenient. I'd shown up out of duty, not strategy, and somehow, that duty had turned into the largest windfall I'd ever imagined. The lawyer slid a folder across his enormous mahogany desk. Inside were documents I didn't understand, numbers that made my head spin, accounts and investments and properties scattered across 3 states. There was the mansion in Scottsdale, worth at least $8 million on its own. There were commercial properties, stock portfolios, bonds, and something called a hedge fund that the lawyer assured me was performing quite well. "You don't have to make any decisions today," he said, his voice gentle, like he understood that my brain had essentially stopped processing information after hearing 34 million. "Take your time, review everything. I'm here to help you navigate this transition." Transition. What a sterile word for having your entire life blown apart. I didn't tell anyone that night. I drove home in a daze, my mind spinning through possibilities and fears in equal measure. $34 million. It could change everything. It could solve every problem Julie had with her mortgage, help Tom finally get his business off the ground, let Nancy quit that job she hated at the insurance company, where her boss treated her like dirt. But something in my gut twisted at the thought of telling them. Some instinct I couldn't name, yet whispered that I should wait, should think this through. I'd read articles about lottery winners who ended up bankrupt and alone, about how sudden wealth destroyed families and friendships. But that was lottery winners, strangers who won random money. This was different. This was family. This was blood. I wish I could say I listened to that instinct completely, but by the next morning, I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid. This was my family. We'd been through everything together. Mom's cancer, the long months of chemo where we took turns driving her to appointments, holding her hand, pretending we weren't terrified. Dad's accident, the drunk driver who'd taken him from us too soon, and how we'd held each other through the funeral and the horrible empty months after. Julie's divorce from that narcissistic asshole who'd tried to turn her kids against her. Tom's bankruptcy when his first business failed and he'd almost lost his house. We were the people who showed up for each other. We were family. So I called Nancy first, asked her to come over for coffee. I told myself I was just being cautious, telling them one at a time instead of making some big announcement. Looking back, I can see I was testing the waters, checking the temperature before I jumped in. But I didn't know that then. I thought I was just being thoughtful. Nancy arrived at 10, and I could tell immediately something was different. She had that look, the one she got when she wanted something but was trying to be casual about it. Her smile was too bright, her hug too enthusiastic. She complimented my garden, which she'd never done before, and asked how I was sleeping, which was such a strange question that I actually paused before answering. We'd been sisters for 59 years. I knew her faces. I knew when she was happy, when she was faking it, when she was calculating something behind those blue eyes we'd both inherited from Mom. But I pushed that observation aside and told her about Uncle Gerald, about the money, about how I was still processing it all. I watched her face carefully, looking for happiness, for surprise, for that shared joy of unexpected good fortune. What I saw instead was something that made my stomach drop. It was gone in a flash, that look, replaced so quickly with a bright smile and congratulations that I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Almost. But it had been there. That split second of calculation, of wheels turning, of seeing me not as her sister, but as something else entirely. An opportunity, maybe. A resource. A solution to her own problems. She asked me what I planned to do with it, and the question felt loaded somehow. Like she'd already been thinking about this, planning for this, even though I'd only known for 24 hours myself. "I don't know yet," I said, wrapping my hands around my coffee mug, even though it was already lukewarm. "It's so much money. I need to think it through, maybe talk to a financial advisor." "That's smart," Nancy said, nodding vigorously, too vigorously. You definitely need professional help with something like this. Actually, Greg, my husband's brother, he works in wealth management. I could give you his number. He'd probably give you a family discount. I pushed the thought away, told myself I was being unfair. She hugged me, told me how happy she was for me, asked if I'd told Tom and Julie yet. When I said no, she suggested maybe we should all get together soon, have a family meeting to discuss it. We're all in this together, she said. That's what family means. She left 20 minutes later with a strange sort of energy I couldn't quite place. I stood at my window and watched her get into her car, and I saw her pull out her phone before she even started the engine. Who was she calling? Why did it feel like she couldn't wait to get away from me? I called Tom next, and then Julie. The same pattern repeated itself. Brief flash of something calculating, quickly masked, enthusiastic congratulations, questions about my plans, suggestions that came out just a little too quickly, like they'd been prepared in advance somehow, which was impossible because I'd only known for 24 hours myself. Tom thought I should invest in his new business venture, some tech startup that needed capital. He had the whole pitch ready, market analysis, projected returns, the works. When had he prepared all that? Julie wondered if I'd consider helping her buy a bigger house, something with a yard for the kids. She even had listings bookmarked on her phone, houses she wanted to show me. 3-bedroom ranches in good school districts, all priced between $400,000 and $600,000. She'd done her homework. Nancy called back that evening to tell me about a financial advisor her husband knew, someone who could help me make the most of this blessing. That word, blessing, it stuck in my throat somehow. She said they were having a barbecue on Sunday, nothing fancy, just family, and maybe we could all talk about my good fortune then. By the end of that second day, I felt exhausted, drained in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness and everything to do with a creeping sense that something had shifted. The foundation I'd built my whole life on felt less solid than it had 2 days ago. Like an earthquake had passed through, and even though everything looked the same on the surface, there were cracks in the structure I couldn't see but could definitely feel. I want to pause here because I think you might be yelling at your screen right now, telling me you saw it coming, that I should have known better. And you're right. But here's the thing about betrayal from the people you love most. You don't see it coming because you're not looking for it. You can't live your whole life suspicious of your own family, always watching for knives in the dark. Or at least, I couldn't. I'd built my entire identity around being the reliable one, the one who held us together, who smoothed over conflicts and kept everyone connected. When Nancy and Tom hadn't spoken for 3 years after some stupid argument about Mom's estate, I'd been the one who'd gotten them in the same room, who'd mediated and compromised until they were talking again. When Julie's ex was being difficult about custody, I'd been the one helping her navigate the legal system, paying for her lawyer when she couldn't afford it. Family unity wasn't just important to me. It was who I was. And when who you are becomes wrapped up in something, you'll ignore a lot of warning signs to protect it. I know that now. But standing in my kitchen that night, watching the sun set over the Phoenix skyline and painting the desert in shades of orange and purple, I just felt confused and sad and couldn't quite say why. The next Sunday dinner was when things really started to crack. We always rotated houses, and this week it was at Tom's place. I brought my famous potato salad, the one with the bacon and the special mustard dressing that everyone always asked for. Julie brought the kids, who immediately ran to the backyard to play on Tom's swing set. Nancy brought wine, expensive bottles that were way nicer than what we usually had at these dinners. And Tom grilled steaks in the backyard, huge cuts that must have cost him a fortune. When had Tom ever sprung for filet mignon? On the surface, everything looked normal. We ate, we laughed, the kids played. But underneath, there was this current of something I couldn't name. They kept exchanging glances, little looks that passed between them when they thought I wasn't watching. Nancy and Tom would have these brief, whispered conversations that stopped the moment I got close. Julie kept steering the conversation back to the inheritance, asking questions that felt rehearsed. What was I going to do with the money? Had I made any decisions yet? Was I planning to invest it Or just save it? Did I have a will? That last question came from Tom, and it was so jarring that I actually laughed. A will? I was 62, not on my deathbed. But he pressed it. Said at my age it was important to have everything sorted out, to make sure my wishes were clear. You never know what could happen, he said, flipping a steak with more force than necessary. Car accident, heart attack, aneurysm. You need to protect your assets. Make sure everything goes where you want it to go. Nancy jumped in, agreeing enthusiastically, saying she and her husband had just updated their will last month, and it gave them such peace of mind. It's the responsible thing to do, she said, especially now that you have so much to protect. I looked at Julie, waiting for her to laugh at the absurdity of this conversation at a Sunday dinner, but she was nodding along, saying she'd been thinking the same thing. I worry about you, Mom, she said, living alone in that big house. What if something happened? I wanted to point out that I'd been living alone in that house for 15 years, ever since her father and I divorced, and no one had worried about me before. But I didn't. I just smiled and said I'd think about it, and changed the subject to the kids' school year. But the damage was done. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the dinner, the looks, the questions, the feeling that I'd walked into a conversation that had started before I arrived. At 2 a.m, I got up and made tea, standing in my kitchen in the dark, because turning on the light felt like admitting defeat somehow. I thought about all the years I'd dedicated to this family, the time I'd taken off work when Nancy's first marriage fell apart, holding her while she cried for hours about how she'd wasted 5 years on a man who'd cheated on her with her best friend. I'd helped her move into a new apartment, had let her stay with me for 3 months when she couldn't afford rent. I'd been there. The money I'd loaned Tom for his first business, $20,000 that had represented my entire savings at the time. Money I'd never seen again, but never asked for because family doesn't keep score. He'd promised to pay me back as soon as things took off. But things had never taken off, and eventually we'd just stopped mentioning it. The months I'd spent helping Julie with the babies when she was drowning in postpartum depression and her ex-husband was no help at all. I'd basically moved in with her, waking up for night feedings, changing diapers, cooking meals, keeping her alive when she couldn't see past the darkness. I'd saved her life. I wasn't being dramatic. She'd told me herself that she didn't think she would have survived without me. I'd shown up. I'd always shown up. And now, standing there in the dark with my tea growing cold in my hands, I wondered if that had been my mistake. If by always being there, always being reliable, I'd somehow made myself less valuable. Or maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe the inheritance had just made me suspicious of everyone. Maybe I was the problem. I tried to push it out of my mind, to focus on other things. I went to my book club on Tuesday, where we discussed a novel about family secrets that hit a little too close to home. I volunteered at the community center on Thursday, serving lunch to seniors who were worse off than me, reminding myself to be grateful. I babysat the grandkids on Saturday while Julie went to some appointment she was vague about. Just some errands, she'd said when I asked. You know how it is. But I didn't know. Julie usually told me everything, down to what toothpaste she'd bought at Target. This vagueness was new. Normal life, normal routines. But that feeling wouldn't leave me. That sense that something had fundamentally changed, and I was the only one who didn't know the new rules of the game. It was like everyone else had gotten a script I hadn't been given, and I was just improvising blindly while they all knew their lines. 2 weeks after Uncle Gerald's lawyer had changed my life, Nancy called and asked me to lunch. Just us girls, she said. Sister time. We met at this little cafe we both loved, the one with the patio that overlooked a small park. It was one of those perfect Phoenix days where the temperature was just right, where you remembered why people moved to the desert in the first place. She ordered the salad she always ordered, grilled chicken, no dressing on the side, extra tomatoes. I got my usual sandwich, turkey and avocado on sourdough. And for the first few minutes, it almost felt normal. We talked about her kids, about my garden, about the heat. Small talk, safe topics, And then, like she'd been building up to it, she shifted in her seat and said she needed to talk to me about something important. Her face got serious. Her voice dropped to that concerned tone she used when she was about to say something she thought I wouldn't want to hear. "The family was worried about me," she said. "We all were. Having that much money suddenly, it could be overwhelming. It could make you a target. It could change you. We've all seen the stories," she said, leaning forward like she was sharing state secrets. "People who win the lottery and lose everything, friends and family coming out of the woodwork, scammers targeting vulnerable people." I almost laughed at that. Vulnerable? I'd been managing my own finances for 40 years. I'd raised a daughter alone, had navigated a divorce, had built a comfortable retirement. When exactly had I become vulnerable? But she kept going. She'd been doing some research, talking to people who knew about these things, and the consensus was that I needed to be careful, very careful. There were scams, she said, people who would try to take advantage, family members who might suddenly appear asking for money. I did laugh at that last part, because wasn't that exactly what was happening? But Nancy didn't seem to catch the irony. She just looked at me with those concerned eyes and laid out what she and Tom and Julie had discussed. They thought I should put the money in a trust, something that would protect it. And since managing that kind of wealth was complicated, maybe it would be better to have co-trustees, people I could trust, family. She was offering to help me, she said. They all were. It would take the burden off my shoulders. I wouldn't have to make all those big decisions alone. We could do it together, like we'd always done everything, like family should. I looked at my sister across that patio table, the morning sun catching the gray in her hair that she'd been dyeing for years but had recently let grow out, and I felt something inside me crack, because I knew. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't about helping me. This was about controlling me, about getting their hands on money that wasn't theirs. And the worst part, the part that really hurt, was that they thought I was stupid enough to fall for it. Or maybe they didn't care if I saw through it. Maybe they figured I'd go along with it anyway, because that's what I always did. I was the peacekeeper, the reliable one, the one who sacrificed her own needs to keep everyone happy. Well, maybe they were right about that. Maybe I had spent so long being that person that I'd forgotten I could be anyone else. I told Nancy I needed to think about it. She smiled, said of course, take all the time I needed, but maybe not too long because these things were time-sensitive. What did that even mean? Time-sensitive? Was my money going to evaporate if I didn't sign it over to them immediately? I didn't ask. I just paid for lunch, something I always did, I realized. I always paid. And drove home with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. That night, I pulled out every document I had about the inheritance. I read through everything. Uncle Gerald's will, the trust documents, the account statements. I called the lawyer with questions, writing down everything he said in a notebook I'd bought specifically for this purpose. I started educating myself about trusts and estate planning and all the legal jargon I'd been avoiding. And the more I learned, the more I understood how elaborate their plan must be. Because you don't just casually suggest someone put their entire inheritance in a trust with family co-trustees unless you've done your homework, unless you've planned it, unless you've consulted with lawyers and figured out exactly how to legally steal someone's money while making it look like you're helping them. The confrontation I'd been dreading came 2 days later, but not the way I expected. I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't prepared. I was just picking up some groceries on a Wednesday afternoon, lost in thought about what kind of pasta to make for dinner, when I ran into Sylvia Martinez in the produce section. Now, Sylvia and I had history, and not the good kind. She used to be married to a man I'd dated briefly before I met my ex-husband, and there had been some drama years ago that I'd mostly forgotten about. Something about overlapping timelines and accusations that I'd started seeing him before they'd officially split. It hadn't been true, but Sylvia had believed it, and we'd been cold to each other ever since. We weren't enemies exactly, but we weren't friends either. We were the kind of people who smiled politely when we saw each other and kept moving. But that day, she didn't keep moving. She stopped her cart right next to mine and looked at me with something that might have been pity. "You okay?" she asked. "You look tired." I started to give her the standard fine thanks response, but something in her face stopped me. She looked like she was debating with herself about something, like she was deciding whether to tell me something she knew I wouldn't want to hear. And then she said it. "I heard about your uncle, the inheritance. I'm sorry." I was so confused. Sorry? Why would she be sorry about me inheriting money? And then she told me. Her nephew worked at the same law firm Tom used for his business. Small world, right? And apparently, Tom had been in there the previous week with Nancy, talking to an estate lawyer about trusts, specifically about how to establish one for an elderly relative who might not be completely competent to manage their own affairs. An elderly relative who might not be completely competent. I stood there in the produce section of that grocery store, holding a bag of apples I didn't remember picking up, and I felt something in my chest just collapse. Not my heart breaking. That's too poetic. It was more like a building falling in on itself, all the support beams suddenly giving way at once. They weren't just planning to control my money. They were planning to declare me incompetent, to take it all away completely. And they'd been plotting this for weeks, maybe since the day I first told Nancy. All those Sunday dinners, all those concerned phone calls, all that talk about helping me. It was all just the setup for this. Sylvia was still talking, her voice gentle now, telling me she thought I should know, that she hoped she wasn't overstepping. But I couldn't really hear her over the rushing sound in my ears, over the sound of everything I'd believed about my family shattering like glass hitting concrete. I thanked Sylvia, I think. I must have, because she squeezed my arm and told me if I needed anything, to call her. She wrote her number on the back of a receipt and pressed it into my hand. Then she left, and I stood there alone among the vegetables and fruit, feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. I don't remember driving home. I don't remember putting away the groceries, though I must have because they were in my fridge the next day. Somewhere between the grocery store and my house, I must have functioned on autopilot, turned the key, shifted gears, stopped at red lights, parked in my driveway. But my conscious mind was somewhere else entirely, replaying Sylvia's words over and over like a broken record. Elderly relative who might not be completely competent. Elderly relative who might not be completely competent. The words echoed in my skull like a death sentence. I found myself standing in my kitchen, staring at the groceries scattered across the counter. A carton of eggs, a loaf of bread, that bag of apples I'd been holding when my world collapsed. They looked alien somehow, like props from someone else's life. When had I become someone who needed protecting from herself? When had capable, independent me transformed in their eyes into a confused old woman who couldn't manage her own affairs? The next thing I clearly remember is sitting on my bathroom floor at 7 p.m., my back against the cold tile staring at the wall. I'm not sure how I got there. I don't remember walking down the hallway, don't remember sinking to the floor. But there I was, legs pulled up to my chest, arms wrapped around my knees like I was trying to hold myself together. I couldn't feel my hands or my feet. They were there, I could see them, but it was like they belonged to someone else. My whole body felt disconnected, shut down, like my brain had decided the only way to survive this was to stop processing sensation entirely. I stared at that wall for I don't know how long, and for the first time, I really saw the cracks. They'd always been there. Hairline fractures in the plaster that I'd been meaning to fix for months. But now they looked different. They looked like the cracks in my family, in my life, in everything I'd believed was solid and real. And just like these wall cracks, maybe those other cracks had always been there too. Maybe I'd just been too busy spackling over them, painting them over, pretending everything was fine. Have you ever felt like you're looking at your life and it's just not yours anymore? Like someone stole it and left a cheap copy in its place, and everyone else is pretending not to notice the difference? That's what sitting on that bathroom floor felt like. Like I'd woken up in a parallel universe where the people who were supposed to love me most were plotting to destroy me, and I was supposed to just accept it. I don't know how long I sat there before I heard my phone ringing in the other room. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again, and again. Finally, I dragged myself up and checked it. 7 missed calls, 3 from Nancy, 2 from Julie, 2 from Tom. And 1 voicemail from Nancy saying they needed to talk, it was important. Could I come by tomorrow? They'd all be there. A family meeting. How convenient, how perfectly orchestrated. I looked at my phone, at my sister's number on the screen, and something shifted inside me. That collapsed feeling, that shutdown, it started to transform into something else. Something colder and harder and infinitely more focused. They thought I was weak. They thought I was stupid. They thought that after a lifetime of putting them first, I'd just roll over and let them take everything. Well, maybe it was time to show them exactly how wrong they were. That night, I called Sylvia back. It took me 3 tries to dial the number because my hands were shaking, but I did it. She answered on the second ring, and I asked her if we could meet. Tomorrow, I said. Early. I need help, and I don't know who else to ask. There was a pause, and I could practically hear her weighing whether she wanted to get involved in this mess. We weren't friends. We'd barely been civil to each other for years. Why would she help me? But then she said yes. Come by at 8, she said. We'll figure this out. I thanked her and hung up, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't alone anymore. I had an ally. Even if that ally was someone I'd barely spoken to in years, someone who had every reason to enjoy watching my family drama unfold. She was on my side now, and that counted for something. That counted for everything. I met Sylvia at her house the next morning, a small adobe-style place in an older part of Phoenix that she'd filled with plants and colorful art. The walls were covered in paintings, bright desert landscapes, and abstract pieces that looked like they'd been done by someone who understood pain. There were succulents everywhere, thriving in ways that made my own sad houseplants look like failures. She made coffee, strong and black, and we sat at her kitchen table while I told her everything. Not just about the inheritance and the plan to control it, but about all the years before. All the times I'd put them first. All the sacrifices I'd made. The money, the time, the pieces of myself I'd given away thinking that's what family meant. She listened without interrupting, and when I finally ran out of words, she sat back and looked at me with something that might have been respect. You've been their doormat, she said. Not mean, just factual. And now they're mad because the doormat suddenly came into money. I wanted to argue, to defend my family, but I couldn't. Because she was right. That's exactly what had happened. I'd spent so long being the person who made everything easier for everyone else that they'd forgotten I was a person at all. I was just a role, a function, the family glue. And now that role came with $34 million, and they wanted to make sure they could access it. Sylvia had her own story of family betrayal. Her ex-husband had tried to clean her out in the divorce, and her own brother had testified against her, saying she was unstable and couldn't be trusted with money. It had taken her years to rebuild her life, but she'd done it. And in the process, she'd learned a lot about protecting yourself from the people who are supposed to love you. She gave me the name of a lawyer. Not the estate lawyer Uncle Gerald had used, but someone who specialized in family disputes. Someone who understood that sometimes the biggest threat to your well-being comes from inside your own house. She also gave me something I hadn't expected: permission. Permission to be angry. Permission to fight back. Permission to stop being the peacekeeper and start being the warrior. You don't owe them your money, she said, refilling my coffee cup. You don't owe them your peace. You don't owe them anything except honesty, and even that's debatable at this point. I called the lawyer that afternoon from my car, sitting in a parking lot, because I didn't want to have this conversation in my own house where it might feel like walls had ears. His name was Marcus Webb, and he'd been practicing family law for 30 years. He'd seen it all, he told me. And unfortunately, what I was describing wasn't even that unusual. Elder financial abuse was a massive problem, and most of it came from family members. He asked me questions I hadn't thought to ask myself. Did I have a will? Yes. Did they know what was in it? Generally. Did they have access to any of my accounts? No. That was one thing I'd done right. Had I signed any powers of attorney? No. Good, he said. That's very good. Because once you sign those, it becomes much harder to maintain control. He asked me what I wanted to happen, and I realized I didn't know. Did I want to cut them off completely? Did I want to expose their plan? Did I just want to protect my assets and hope they'd back off? I didn't have answers. All I knew was that I couldn't let them win. Marcus suggested I make some quiet changes to my estate plan. Nothing dramatic, nothing they'd notice immediately. Just updates that would make it impossible for them to execute their plan, even if I did end up incapacitated somehow. He'd draft new documents, new trustees who weren't family, new protections. We'll set up a corporate trustee, he explained, his voice steady and reassuring in a way that made me want to cry. A bank or trust company. They have fiduciary duties that family members don't. They can't just decide you're incompetent because it's convenient. There are legal standards, medical evaluations, court oversight. He walked me through the process, step by step. We'd establish a revocable living trust with the corporate trustee as the primary administrator. I'd retain full control as long as I was capable, but if something did happen to me, a real stroke, real dementia, an actual medical crisis, there would be objective professionals making decisions, not family members with their own agendas. We'd also set up a durable power of attorney for health care, separate from finances, naming someone outside the family. Marcus suggested one of his partners, a woman who specialized in elder law and had no connection to my situation. It felt strange to hand over that much trust to a stranger, but then again, my family had proven themselves to be bigger strangers than anyone I'd just met. What about a letter of intent? I asked. Something that explains my wishes, my reasoning? Marcus nodded approvingly. That's smart. Not legally binding, but it can provide context if anyone questions your capacity when you made these changes. We'll document everything, your mental state, your reasoning, your understanding of what you're signing. If they try to challenge this later, we'll have evidence that you were fully competent when you made these decisions. The word competent hit me like a slap. That I even needed to prove my competence to my own family felt surreal. And in the meantime, I should act normal. Don't let them know I was onto them. Don't give them any reason to accelerate whatever timeline they were working on. Marcus was clear about this. If they suspected I knew, they might try something more desperate, more immediate. It was good advice, but it went against every instinct I had. I wanted to confront them. I wanted to scream at them and ask them how they could do this to me. But I swallowed that impulse and agreed. Silent changes, strategic moves. I could do that. I'd spent my whole life accommodating everyone else's needs. Surely I could pretend a little longer while I protected myself. The family meeting was scheduled for that Friday at Nancy's house. All week, I practiced in the mirror. Practiced looking confused and grateful. Practiced the face of someone who had no idea what was coming. It felt absurd, standing in my bathroom rehearsing facial expressions like I was preparing for a play. But this was a performance, wasn't it? The performance of my life. Oh, you've all put so much thought into this, I'd say to my reflection, trying to sound touched rather than disgusted. I'm so lucky to have family who cares. The words tasted like poison, but I forced them out again and again until they sounded natural. I practiced looking uncertain, biting my lip the way I did when I was genuinely confused. I practiced gratitude, letting my eyes get a little misty, like I was overwhelmed by their concern. I signed the new documents Marcus had prepared on Thursday afternoon. His office was in a different building than Uncle Gerald's lawyer, deliberately chosen to avoid any connection they might trace. The conference room was smaller, warmer somehow, with family photos on the desk that reminded me what normal families looked like. Marcus had 3 witnesses present, his paralegal, another attorney from the firm, and a notary public. Overkill, maybe, but he wanted an ironclad record that I was of sound mind when I made these changes. "For the record," Marcus said before we began, addressing everyone in the room, "I'm going to ask you some questions to establish your mental capacity and understanding of these documents. Is that okay?" I nodded. He asked me the date, the president's name, where I lived, what I'd had for breakfast. Simple questions that felt insulting but necessary. Then he asked about the documents themselves. Did I understand what I was signing? Did I understand the role of the corporate trustee? Had anyone pressured me into making these changes? "No one pressured me," I said clearly. "I'm doing this to protect myself and my assets, according to my own wishes." The paralegal was recording everything, Marcus explained. Video documentation of my competence, my understanding, my free will. If Nancy and Tom tried to claim I'd been confused or manipulated, we'd have proof. I signed page after page, adding an attorney I'd never met as my primary trustee and establishing clear guidelines for any future changes. Everything was locked down tight. Protection layered on protection. My inheritance, the money Uncle Gerald had left me because I'd shown up, because I'd been authentic, was now shielded behind legal walls my family couldn't breach. But they didn't know that. As far as they knew, I was still the same confused, overwhelmed woman who needed her family's help. Friday morning, I woke up with a strange calm. I knew what was going to happen. I knew they were going to present their plan, probably with some lawyer of their own, probably with papers already drawn up for me to sign. And I was going to let them play it all out. I was going to watch them reveal exactly who they were. I arrived at Nancy's at 2 p.m. like she'd asked. Her house looked the same as always, the neat lawn, the flowering cactus garden she was so proud of, the welcome mat that said, "Family is everything." That last detail hit differently now. Family is everything. Everything you can take from each other, apparently. Tom was already there, sitting at the dining room table with a leather folder in front of him. He was wearing a suit, which should have been my first clue something formal was happening. Tom never wore suits unless it was a funeral or a court date. He smiled when I walked in, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, sis," he said, standing to give me a hug that felt performative, like he was checking off a box. "Thanks for coming." Julie showed up 10 minutes after me, looking nervous, like she knew something big was about to happen. She hugged me too, held on a little too long, and I could feel her trembling. For a moment, I wondered if she was having second thoughts. If maybe my daughter still had enough conscience left to feel guilty about what they were about to do. But then she pulled away and wouldn't meet my eyes, and I knew. She was nervous about getting caught, not about betraying me. Nancy had made tea and set out cookies, like this was a social visit. The good china, I noticed, the cups Mom had left her when she died, the ones with the tiny roses painted on them. We'd fought about those cups, actually. Nancy had wanted them, I'd wanted the quilt, Tom had wanted the jewelry. We'd divided Mom's things like civilized people, making compromises, staying family. She was wearing a new blouse, I noticed. Something expensive, silk maybe, in a deep blue that brought out her eyes. When had Nancy started buying expensive clothes? She could barely afford her mortgage last time we talked. "You look nice," I said, playing my part. "Oh, this old thing?" She smoothed her hand down the front, clearly pleased I'd noticed. "I thought I should dress up a bit. This is an important day." We made small talk for a few minutes, and I could feel the tension building. Nancy asked about my garden. Julie asked if I'd been sleeping better. Tom mentioned something about the weather. All of us dancing around the real conversation, the real reason we were there. Finally, Nancy cleared her throat and said she was glad I could make it because they had something important to discuss. She exchanged a look with Tom, and he nodded like they'd rehearsed this part. "We've been talking," Nancy began, setting down her teacup with a delicate click that sounded too loud in the quiet room. "All of us. About you. About the inheritance. About how to make sure you're protected." Tom pulled out the folder. The plan, he called it. "They'd all been talking," he said, "and they were worried about me. Managing this much money was a huge responsibility, and they didn't want to see me get taken advantage of. So they'd consulted with an estate attorney. They glanced at each other here, a look of smug satisfaction, and put together a proposal, a family trust. All four of us would be co-trustees, but since I was the primary beneficiary, I'd retain control, except, of course, all major decisions would require majority agreement. For my protection," Julie added, "so I wouldn't make any rash decisions." Tom slid the papers across the table. All I had to do was sign, and everything would be taken care of. They'd handle the complicated stuff. I could just relax and know my family had my back. I picked up the papers and pretended to read them, even though Marcus had already shown me what a trust like this would actually mean. It would mean they controlled everything. 3 votes to 1. They could decide how the money was invested, how much I could withdraw, what counted as appropriate spending. They could essentially put me on an allowance from my own inheritance. And the worst part was buried in the fine print. If at any point they deemed me incapable of making sound financial decisions, they could remove me as a beneficiary entirely and redistribute the assets among themselves. It was brilliant, in a horrifying way. They'd effectively written themselves into my uncle's will. I looked up at 3 faces I'd known my whole life, 3 people I'd loved and trusted and sacrificed for, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a cold, clear certainty about what I had to do. I set the papers down and smiled. "This is really comprehensive," I said. "You've put a lot of thought into this." They practically glowed with pride. "They had," Nancy said. "They just wanted what was best for me. Of course they did." I picked up my tea and took a sip, letting them wait, letting the anticipation build. And then I said the words that changed everything. "I've already made arrangements for the inheritance." Their faces froze. "What arrangements?" Tom asked. The smile had disappeared. I explained that I'd met with my own attorney, that I'd established a trust with an independent trustee, that all the assets were protected and allocated according to my wishes. Their faces went through such a rapid series of emotions, I almost laughed. Confusion, disbelief, anger, panic. Nancy recovered first. "Well," she said, her voice tight, "that seems hasty. We were just trying to help." "Were you?" I asked, "because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you were trying to steal my inheritance." The room exploded. Tom yelling that I was being ridiculous, his face turning red in that way it did when he was cornered. "After everything we've done for you, after all the time we've spent trying to help you." Julie was crying now, real tears streaming down her face, but I couldn't tell if they were genuine or strategic. "Mom, how can you say that? We love you. We're trying to protect you." Nancy just stared at me, cold and furious. Her hands gripping the armrests of her chair so tight her knuckles had gone white. "You ungrateful." She stopped herself, took a breath, visibly trying to control her anger. "After everything, after all these years, this is how you treat your family?" "My family?" I asked quietly. "Is that what you are?" "We've always been there for you," Nancy spat. "When your marriage fell apart, who was there? When you needed help with Julie, who showed up? When I had money," I interrupted, "who plotted to take it?" Tom slammed his hand on the table, making the teacups rattle. "We were trying to help you, trying to make sure you didn't get scammed or manipulated or make my own decisions," I finished for him. "Make my own choices with my own inheritance." But I just sat there, calm as glass, and let them rage. Let them show me exactly who they were when they didn't get what they wanted. This was the real them, I realized. Not the concerned family members from Sunday dinners. Not the supportive siblings and loving daughter. This, the The anger, the entitlement, the fury at being denied access to money that was never theirs, this was truth. When they finally ran out of steam, when the yelling had died down to bitter silence, I told them about Sylvia, about the nephew who'd overheard their plans, about how I knew they'd been working with a lawyer to declare me incompetent. "So you see," I said softly, "I know exactly what you were planning. The trust was just step one, wasn't it? Get me to sign over control. And then if I resisted or tried to change my mind, you'd have me declared incapable. You'd have doctors' reports ready, testimonials about my declining mental state, evidence that I needed protection from myself." Tom's face had gone pale. Nancy was staring at her hands. Julie was still crying, but quietly now, like she'd run out of energy for the performance. The color drained from Tom's face. Nancy's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Julie just stared at her hands. I gave them one chance to be honest, one chance to explain, to apologize, to show me I'd gotten it wrong somehow. The silence stretched out like taffy. And then Nancy did the worst thing possible. She laughed. It was a brittle, angry sound that had nothing to do with humor. "You think you're so smart," she said. "You think you've won, but that money should have been split 4 ways to begin with. Uncle Gerald was senile when he made that will. If you'd been fair, you'd have shared it. But no, you had to keep it all for yourself." That's what this came down to, I realized. Not concern for my well-being, not love or family, just greed, pure and simple. They decided they deserved my money, and when I wouldn't hand it over willingly, they decided to take it. Tom tried a different approach, getting quiet and reasonable. "Look," he said, "maybe we all got a little ahead of ourselves, but we're still family. We can work this out." "Can we?" I asked. "Because I don't think we can. I don't think you see me as family anymore. I think you see me as a bank account." Julie was still crying, but now there was anger in it. "You've changed," she said. "The money's changed you. You're not the mother I knew." And that hurt. That one landed. Because maybe she was right. Maybe I had changed, but not because of the money, because of them, because they'd shown me who they really were, and I couldn't unsee it. I stood up to leave, and Nancy grabbed my arm. "If you walk out that door," she said, "we're done. You'll lose all of us." "Will I?" I asked. "Or have I already lost you?" I pulled my arm free and walked out. Behind me, I could hear them starting to argue among themselves, blame shifting and accusations flying, but I didn't care. I'd spent months carrying the weight of their betrayal, and I was finally setting it down. The drive home was surreal. The Phoenix sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed too beautiful for how I felt. My phone started ringing before I even got home. Nancy, Tom, Julie, all calling. I turned it off. Whatever they had to say, I didn't want to hear it. Not yet, maybe not ever. The next few weeks were a blur of legal paperwork and family drama. Nancy hired her own lawyer and threatened to contest Uncle Gerald's will, claiming he'd been unduly influenced or mentally incompetent. It was laughable, really. She was claiming the same incompetence about Uncle Gerald that she'd been planning to claim about me. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't been so painful. Marcus had anticipated this move. He'd already gathered medical records showing Uncle Gerald had been sharp as a tack until the day he died. We had testimony from his doctors, his accountants, his neighbors. We had the original will, drafted 5 years before his death when he was undeniably competent. Nancy's lawyer took one look at what we had and advised her to drop it. She didn't, of course. Pride wouldn't let her. So we went through 3 months of depositions and motions and legal fees that probably cost her $20,000 she didn't have. It went nowhere. Marcus had made sure of that. But it kept her busy and angry, which was fine by me. As long as she was focused on the will, she wasn't focused on me. Tom spread rumors around the family that I'd cut them all off without explanation, painting himself as the victim. I started getting calls from cousins I hadn't talked to in years, asking if I was okay, if something had happened. Tom had told them I'd changed, that the money had made me paranoid and cruel, that I'd turned my back on the family for no reason. I didn't defend myself at first. Didn't see the point in airing our dirty laundry to extended family who had their own problems. But then Aunt Marie called, Mom's sister, the one who'd always been kind to me, and I could hear the worry in her voice. "Your mother would be heartbroken," she said gently. "Whatever's happened between you and your siblings, surely you can work it out. Family is too important to throw away." That's when I told her. Not everything, but enough. I told her about the trust, about the plan to control my inheritance, about the lawyer consultations for declaring me incompetent. I heard her sharp intake of breath, the long pause that followed. "Oh, honey," she finally said. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea." She must have told others, because the phone calls from extended family stopped after that, and I started getting different calls, people checking on me, offering support, sharing their own stories of family betrayal. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who'd had problems with Nancy and Tom over the years. Julie tried the guilt approach, sending me long emails about how the kids missed me and didn't understand why Grandma was being so mean. She attached photos, the kids at the park, at school, opening Christmas presents. Pictures designed to remind me of what I was losing. Every email ended the same way. "They keep asking when you're coming to visit. I don't know what to tell them." I wanted to respond, wanted to explain that I wasn't the one who'd broken this family, that I wasn't the villain in this story. But what would I say? Your mother tried to steal my inheritance? Your mother and aunt and uncle conspired to have me declared incompetent? How do you explain that to children without destroying their relationship with their mother? So I didn't respond. I saved every email, though. Marcus said it might be useful evidence of harassment later. The irony wasn't lost on me, my daughter's attempts at emotional manipulation being filed away as legal evidence. I later learned that 1 in 10 Americans over 60 experiences some form of elder abuse, and in 70% of those cases, it comes from a family member. I was not some isolated tragedy. I was a statistic. But knowing that didn't make it hurt less. It just made me feel less alone. Through it all, Sylvia was there, not hovering, not smothering, just present. She'd text to check in, invite me for coffee, remind me to eat when I forgot. She'd been through her own version of this betrayal, and she understood in ways other people couldn't. We became real friends, which was strange and wonderful. Who knew that your former enemy's ex-wife could become your closest ally? Life is funny that way. She also introduced me to her book club, a group of women who'd all survived various forms of family dysfunction and came out stronger. Listening to their stories helped. It reminded me that I wasn't weak for believing in my family. I was human. And humans are wired to trust the people who raise them, who grow up with them, who share their blood. Breaking that trust isn't natural, but sometimes it's necessary. The legal proceedings dragged on. Nancy's contest of the will failed, but she didn't give up. She convinced some distant cousins to join her in filing a lawsuit claiming I'd manipulated Uncle Gerald. It was absurd. I'd barely known the man, but it was also expensive and time-consuming. Marcus assured me we'd win, but the process was exhausting. Meanwhile, Tom's business failed, and he blamed me for not investing when I'd had the chance. Julie's mortgage went into foreclosure, and she sent me articles about grandparents' moral obligations to help their children. The manipulation was relentless, and there were days I almost caved. Days I thought maybe I should just give them some money to make it stop. But Sylvia would remind me that giving in to blackmail doesn't end it. It just teaches them that blackmail works. 6 months after that confrontation in Nancy's living room, all the lawsuits were dismissed. The judge had been particularly harsh with Nancy, suggesting that her behavior constituted harassment and that further frivolous filings would not be tolerated. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I just felt tired. I'd won, legally. The money was mine, secure and protected. But the cost had been my family. Nancy wouldn't speak to me. Tom had moved out of state without telling me. Julie and I had a strained relationship at best, talking maybe once a month in stilted conversations that avoided any real topics. The grandkids were growing up without me, and that hurt more than any of the legal battles. Research shows that family estrangement affects about 27% of American adults, and the numbers are climbing. We're becoming a society of fractured families, of broken bonds that can't or won't be repaired. I was part of that statistic now, whether I wanted to be or not. But there was something else too. Something I hadn't expected. Peace. Real peace. Not the fake kind I'd maintained by sacrificing my needs. The first night I slept all the way through without waking up at 3 a.m. in a panic was 3 months after the confrontation. I woke up at 7 to sunlight streaming through my windows and realized I'd slept for 8 solid hours. When was the last time that had happened? I started sleeping through the night again, started making plans for my future instead of always planning around everyone else's crises. I bought a new bed, a really nice one, the kind I'd always wanted but never bought because it seemed extravagant. I replaced my old couch with something comfortable instead of just functional. I hung art on my walls, real art from local galleries, pieces that spoke to me rather than just filling space. I renovated my house, really made it mine instead of just a place to store my stuff between family obligations. I knocked down the wall between the kitchen and dining room, creating an open space that felt bright and airy. I redid the bathroom with heated floors and a rainfall shower. I turned the spare bedroom, the one I'd always kept ready for Julie and the kids, the one they'd used maybe twice in 5 years, into a home office. Every change felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd given away without realizing it. I traveled, Europe, Asia, places I'd always wanted to see, but never had time for. I went alone, which terrified me at first. I'd never traveled alone. There had always been someone else to consider, someone else's preferences to accommodate. But I booked a ticket to Paris and just went. I stood in the Louvre and cried in front of the Mona Lisa, not because it was beautiful, but because I was there. I was finally there, 62 years old, standing in a museum I'd dreamed about since I was a child, and I'd finally made it happen. Not someday, not when the time was right. Now. I went to Japan and watched the cherry blossoms fall in Kyoto. I went to Thailand and learned to cook pad thai from a grandmother who spoke no English but taught me through gestures and laughter. I went to Ireland and traced my family roots, standing in a cemetery where people with my last name had been buried for 400 years. Each trip taught me something new about myself, that I was braver than I thought, that I could navigate foreign cities and language barriers and cultural differences, that I liked my own company, that solitude wasn't loneliness, it was freedom. I donated to charities I believed in, established a scholarship fund for first-generation college students, used the money to make a difference instead of just hoarding it. And slowly, tentatively, I started writing. Journaling at first, just processing everything that had happened. But then I realized other people might benefit from hearing this story. Other people who'd been betrayed by their families, who felt guilty for protecting themselves, who wondered if they were wrong to set boundaries. I started a blog. Nothing fancy, just my story and the lessons I'd learned. I wrote about the warning signs I'd missed, the tactics my family had used, the legal protections I'd put in place. I wrote about the cost of family loyalty when that loyalty is one-sided. And people responded. Hundreds of people, then thousands, all sharing their own stories of family betrayal and financial abuse. I wasn't alone. We were a whole community of people who'd been hurt by the ones who were supposed to love us most. And in that community, I found purpose. I started speaking at senior centers and community colleges, teaching people about estate planning and financial protection. I created resources, funded legal aid for elder abuse victims, became an advocate. A year after everything imploded, I ran into Julie at the grocery store, the same one where Sylvia had warned me, actually. I was in the produce section again. Maybe I should have avoided that store altogether, but it was close to my house and had the good organic tomatoes I liked. I was examining avocados when I heard her voice. "Mom?" I turned, and there she was. Julie looked tired, older than she should at 35. Her hair needed a cut, and she'd lost weight in a way that didn't look healthy. She was wearing yoga pants and an old sweatshirt, the kind of outfit I'd seen her in 1,000 times before. But something about her whole demeanor screamed exhaustion. We stood there in awkward silence for a moment, Other shoppers moving around us like we were rocks in a stream. I could see her trying to decide what to say, how to approach me. Finally, she just blurted it out. "Can we talk? Please. I need to talk to you." I should have said no, should have made an excuse and left. But she was still my daughter, and some part of me, the mother part that never quite shuts off no matter how much you've been hurt, couldn't walk away. "Okay," I said. We went to a coffee shop 2 blocks away, neutral territory. We ordered. She got a latte, I got tea, and sat at a corner table away from other customers. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Julie stirred her coffee, even though she hadn't added anything to it. Just moving the spoon in circles like the motion itself could help her find words. She apologized, sort of. "I'm sorry," she started, "for how everything happened. I was desperate and scared about money, the mortgage, the bills, trying to give the kids everything they needed. And Nancy and Tom, they kept saying you were being selfish, keeping everything for yourself, that it wasn't fair. They made it sound so reasonable, like we were just looking out for you and for the family." "And you believed them?" I asked quietly. "I wanted to," she admitted. It was easier than admitting what we were really doing. At least that was honest. She wanted to know if there was a way to fix things. If we could go back to Sunday dinners and holidays together. If the kids could see their grandmother again. "They miss you," she said, and her voice cracked. "They keep asking when you're coming over, when we're going to your house again. I don't know what to tell them." I looked at my daughter across that coffee shop table, this person I'd carried in my body for 9 months and raised for 18 years and loved for 35. I looked at her tired eyes and her desperate expression, and I felt sad. Not angry anymore, just sad, because I knew the truth. She wasn't sorry she'd tried to take my money. She was sorry she'd failed. If their plan had worked, if I'd signed those papers, she'd be living off my inheritance right now and thinking nothing of it. Maybe feeling a little guilty, maybe not, but certainly not sitting here apologizing. The apology was just another strategy, another way to try to get what she wanted. Maybe not consciously, maybe she even believed she was sincere. But the undercurrent was still there. Get back in Mom's good graces. Rebuild the relationship. And once things were comfortable again, once I'd forgiven and forgotten, then maybe she could ask for help with the mortgage. Just a small loan, just to get caught up, because that's what family does, right? "I do forgive you," I said, and I meant it. Not for her sake, but for mine. Because carrying that anger was exhausting, and I was tired of lugging around the weight of their betrayal. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending it never happened or opening myself up to be hurt again. Forgiveness just means I'm not going to let what they did poison the rest of my life. "But I can't have a relationship with you," I continued. "Not the way things were, maybe not at all. You broke something, Jules. You and Nancy and Tom. And I don't think it can be fixed." She started crying then, real tears, and I felt that old instinct kick in. Comfort her, make it better, take away her pain. But I stayed in my seat. Her pain was hers to carry now, not mine to fix. I wished her well and left. Walked out of that coffee shop and got in my car and sat there for 10 minutes before I could drive. Because it hurt. Of course it hurt. She was still my daughter. But loving someone and having them in your life are 2 different things. I learned that the hard way. Before I end my story, I want to share something important I learned through all of this. Elder financial abuse is one of the most common and least reported crimes in America. Studies suggest it affects about 5% of seniors, though the real number is probably much higher because most cases never come to light. And here's what everyone needs to understand. The profile of a victim isn't what you think. It's not just the confused elderly person with dementia. It's capable, independent people who simply trust their families. The abuse often starts small. A son who needs a loan. A daughter who wants to be added to a bank account for emergencies. Siblings who suggest pooling resources for everyone's benefit. And before you know it, you've given away your financial autonomy piece by piece, thinking you're helping your family when really they're setting you up. The warning signs are subtle. Family members who show unusual interest in your finances, pressure to make quick decisions about money, isolation from friends or other family who might question what's happening, being told you're too old or confused to manage your own affairs, documentation that appears without your clear understanding of what it means. If you're in this situation, here's what you need to do. First, don't isolate yourself. Abusers rely on keeping victims away from outside perspectives. Maintain friendships, join groups, stay connected to people outside the family. Second, never sign anything you don't fully understand. If family members pressure you to sign documents quickly or without consulting an independent attorney, that's a red flag. Take the papers. Have them reviewed by your own lawyer, and don't let anyone rush you. Third, protect your assets proactively. This doesn't mean you're expecting abuse, it just means you're being smart. Have your own attorney, your own financial advisor, people who work for you and only you. Set up your estate plan with independent trustees. Don't give anyone power of attorney unless you absolutely trust them and have safeguards in place. Fourth, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. That gut feeling I had when I first told Nancy about the inheritance, I should have listened to it immediately. We're conditioned to doubt ourselves, especially as we age, especially as women. Don't. Your intuition is valid. And if you're someone who knows a victim of elder financial abuse, here's how you can help. Don't judge them for trusting their family. That's what we're supposed to do. Offer support without pressure. Be a safe person they can talk to. If they're not ready to take action, don't push, but don't abandon them either. Help them access resources, legal aid, adult protective services, financial counseling. Sometimes just knowing there are options can be empowering. And if you witness clear abuse, report it. Many states have mandatory reporting laws for financial exploitation of the elderly. You might be the only advocate that person has. The most important thing I want you to take away from this is that healing isn't about revenge or punishment. It's about reclaiming yourself. Yes, I protected my money. Yes, I fought back legally. But the real victory was internal. It was refusing to let their betrayal define me. It was choosing peace over vindication. It was building a new life that didn't revolve around people who'd proven they couldn't be trusted. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. I know it wasn't easy to hear. These topics are painful, and they hit close to home for a lot of people. But that's exactly why we need to talk about them. Silence protects abusers. Stories like mine, and maybe like yours, need to be told. So let me know in the comments what city you're listening from and what time it is there. I love knowing that my story is reaching people all over the world, that maybe someone in Tokyo or London or Miami is hearing this and feeling a little less alone. And if this story resonated with you, if you saw pieces of your own experience in mine, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these videos, and that means more people getting the information and support they need. Now, I want to ask you something, and I really want you to answer honestly in the comments. Do you think the outcome was fair? My family got away with their plan in a lot of ways. They're not in jail. They didn't lose their homes or their reputations outside our immediate circle. They just lost access to me and my money. Some people say that's enough. Others think they should have faced harsher consequences. What do you think? What would you have done in my place? Would you have exposed them publicly? Would you have pressed charges? Or would you have done exactly what I did, protected yourself, and moved on? I'm genuinely curious because justice is such a personal thing, and there's no one right answer. If you found this video helpful, make sure to subscribe to the channel. I share new stories every week, all of them real experiences from real people navigating complicated family dynamics and coming out stronger. And if you're looking for more content like this, I'd recommend checking out my video on recognizing manipulation tactics in family relationships, or the one about rebuilding your life after betrayal. Both cover topics that connect closely to what we talked about today. Finally, I just want to say this. To anyone out there who's currently trapped in a situation like the one I described, whether it's financial abuse or any other kind of family exploitation, you are not alone. You are not crazy. You are not wrong to want to protect yourself. And it is never too late to reclaim your life. It might be hard, it might cost you relationships, but your peace, your safety, your dignity, those are worth fighting for. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Until the next story, take care of your heart, and remember, family is supposed to be a safe place. If it's not, you have every right to build a new definition of family with people who actually deserve the title. Thanks for listening.